Star Wars. Star Wars. Star Wars.
Star Wars. Star Wars.
Star Wars. Star Wars.
Star Wars.
Star Wars.
In 1977, Star Wars released to theaters and was a big hit. It made bank in the box office, sold a lot of merchandise, and spawned a really weird Christmas special. 2 more movies would follow, each one being a success, and everything was right with the world. And then they kept going. The prequel trilogy would come out years later, all doing good in the box office, selling merchandise, and spawning 2 TV shows. Finally, the story was complete and everything was right with the world. And then they kept going. Okay, so they make another trilogy, add a couple spin-offs in there, most of them are hits at the box office, you know the gist by now. And the story's complete and everything was right with the world. Just kidding, now we're making TV shows and all these different movies from different directors and a new trilogy, and now the Star Wars franchise is bigger than Jabba the Hutt. And with all these different movies comes a lot of different opinions, as some of these movies are beloved classics and some of them are really hated. So after going through all 12 of these movies, here's all the films ranked from worst to best. Spoiler alert for everyone who lives under a rock, and let's begin. In last place is Star Wars The Clone Wars. You may have heard of the animated TV show called Star Wars The Clone Wars, as it's a very popular series. What we may not know is that there's a movie based on the show with the same name. It basically takes a bunch of episodes from the TV show and puts them together to make one long movie, and that's the main problem I have with this movie, that it doesn't even feel like a movie, it feels like a bunch of episodes taped together. It's like if you took the first 4 episodes of Breaking Bad and made it into one film, it just feels lazy. It also doesn't help that the animation looks kinda ugly and lifeless. It's tolerable and works for a TV show, but when you have to watch this animation for 90 minutes straight, you start to become bored with what you're looking at. So for that, I'm gonna put it in last place, as well as not awful by any means. At least the rest of these films actually feel like real movies. Next up is The Rise of Skywalker. As I said in my ranking of the Star Wars trilogies, I think the sequels have 2 good individual films, but it's overall a very disconnected trilogy that had no clear vision going into it, and this movie is basically the result of that. If you don't know, J.J. Abrams directed and written The Force Awakens, but then they replaced him with Rian Johnson for The Last Jedi, and he changes a lot of stuff that was set up in The Force Awakens. And then people don't like The Last Jedi, so instead of having Colin Trevorrow make the 3rd film like they were planning, they brought back J.J. Abrams to change what was set up in The Last Jedi, and therefore you get this jumbled mess of a film that feels like it's constantly trying to undo what happened in the previous films. And the film itself feels rushed even though it's over 2 hours long. It has some weird plot holes and doesn't make a lot of sense. Unlike most people, I think it makes sense why Palpatine came back. He was cloned, and the Palpatine we see in this film is a clone of the Palpatine we see in Return of the Jedi. So I think it makes sense. What doesn't really make sense is how he was able to create all these ships and hire all these stormtroopers in less than 30 years. And him coming back also undermines Darth Vader killing him in the Sith movie. This also has to be the worst lighting I've ever seen from a big budget movie. When you get to the end of the film and they're on that darkly lit planet, I could barely see any of the action. There's some weird flashes of blue lighting, the setting looks weird, and it just looks ugly. And normally when they make a film dark it's to hide bad CGI, so maybe that's why it's so dark in the final act. And the side characters like Poe and Finn have almost nothing to do in this movie, so just a poorly made film. Next up is Attack of the Clones. Now it is worth mentioning that even though this film is really low on the list, there are some things I liked about it. Lightsaber fights, like with the rest of the prequel trilogy, are some of the best in Star Wars, and the last 20 minutes of the film is pretty entertaining, but the rest of the movie has a lot of problems. A lot of this film is about Anakin and Padme and them starting to fall in love, but you feel no chemistry between the actors. I feel like Hayden Christensen gets too much hate for this film, as you don't know how much of his bad acting is his fault, or the director's fault, or the writer's fault, but his acting is not great. It also shares some of the problems I have with the prequel trilogy as a whole, as a CGI and green screen, while looking good for the time, kind of feels dated now. Some people like to say that this is a double standard, as the original trilogy looks outdated, but I don't know. I think practical effects are just more timeless than CGI and green screen. And this is very slow and probably should have been shortened to under 2 hours. I won't act like it's terrible, I'll rewatch it every once in a while, but it is a film that embodies all the problems I have with the prequel trilogy. The CGI looks sloppy, the dialogue is cheesy, the acting is hit or miss, and it could have been a lot shorter. And next up is The Phantom Menace. This is a film that has a lot of great scenes, but the film as a whole is bad. The lightsaber fight with Maul is probably the best lightsaber fight of any Star Wars movie. The way it's choreographed, the music from John Williams, the length of the fight, I'll rewatch this movie just to get to that scene. The pod race scene is also exciting, and again, the score is fantastic. With that being said,
Peace called Jar Jar Binks. Missing your humble servant.
This movie is obviously aimed for kids more than the others on this list. I always find it weird how people say that Star Wars was made specifically for kids because there's some gruesome deaths and scenes that happen in these films, and by making these films specifically for kids, it alienates older audiences from enjoying these films. There's a difference between making a movie that all ages can enjoy and a film that's specifically for children under the age of 10. Just keep Star Wars PG-13, it's pretty much about war anyways. But back to the Phantom Menace, some of the CGI is aged really badly and the plot of the film is kind of uninteresting, but I still put it miles above the last 3 movies on this list. Next up is Solo, a Star Wars story. This movie is okay, it doesn't have anything I particularly love or hate about it, it's visually pleasing and the story is entertaining, and because of that, it's kind of forgettable since there's not a lot that stands out about it. The guy who plays Han Solo in this movie is interesting as he doesn't feel like Han Solo or acts like Han Solo, but he's a great actor who has his own charisma on screen. Donald Glover does a great job as Lando Calrissian, and Woody Harrelson has a lot of screen presence in this film as well, and the scene with the tentacle monster was surprisingly intense. I didn't really like that plotline of a droid rebellion and that droid who keeps protesting for droid rights. It just felt unnecessary and didn't add anything to the story. I also didn't care for the villain that much or the entire ending of the film, so even though I enjoy this movie, it's not one that I come back to that much and it's kind of forgettable as a Star Wars movie. Next up is The Last Jedi. I used to think this is the most divisive Star Wars movie out there, as 50% love it while 50% hate it, but now I just think it's the most hated Star Wars movie, whereas every time I hear about this film, it's about how bad it is or how bad Rian Johnson is as a director. It's a shame how much this film ruined his reputation because he is a fantastic filmmaker who has made some great stuff like Knives Out and some of the best episodes of Breaking Bad. But even though most people hate this movie, I think it's pretty decent. Sure, Luke isn't how he was in the earlier films and the reason for him changing is a little bit off, but people change over time. Like Kanye, it was a weird turn for his character, but just didn't bother me that much, and even if it did, I wouldn't put down the whole movie for that. You can point out some plot holes here and there, but to me, the good outweighs the bad. The cinematography in this film is fantastic, and it's possibly the best looking Star Wars movie of all time. The action scenes are great, the film goes at a good pace, and I didn't know where the movie was going to go next. The casino plotline wasn't my favorite though, and it's not a film that I rewatch often. It has a lot of problems, but I still like this movie, and I think it's greatly overhated. Next up is Rogue One, a Star Wars story. Every time I rewatch this film, I think I'm gonna love it, but I don't. This is a movie that has never clicked with me anytime I ever watched it. It's frustrating because it always feels like this movie that should be better than it actually is. It doesn't help that a lot of the characters feel cliched in one note. Cassian Andor, while being great in his own show, feels like a doppelganger for Han Solo in this movie. K2SO is arrogant and wants to fight. Gerard is wise and full of wisdom. Baze is the best friend who's good at shooting. Director Krennic is evil, and Bodhi has no characteristics that makes him memorable. Jyn is kind of interesting as she seems to be the only one in the group who has good character development, but every other character I just find boring. But that said, the action and visuals are good and doesn't overstay its welcome. It's fine for what it is, I just don't understand the love it gets. Next up is Return of the Jedi. We are finally at the original trilogy, and even though I think this is a weak link of those first 3 films, it's still a great film. The last third of the movie where everything comes to a head is fantastic. I love how they end Vader's character arc here as he finally turns back to the light side and saves his son.
I'll not leave you here. I've got to save you.
You already have.
The space battle at the end was also amazing and probably the best space battle in Star Wars. Even though this film has a lot of great parts to it though, I do think the entire middle section was kind of slow and everything that happens in Endor was my least favorite part of the movie. I still really like this film, but you can definitely feel the drop of quality between this film and the previous one. And next up is The Force Awakens. Say whatever you will about the sequel trilogy, but I love this film. The pacing of the film makes it feel like a roller coaster that never ends. The visuals, the settings, the score, this movie just works as a Star Wars film that I watch the most times. There's a lot of good humor throughout that still gets me to this day. You can say that this movie is a copy of A New Hope as it has a lot of the same story beats, but I thought this was different enough to make it feel like its own thing, so an entertaining, quick-paced film that I rewatch a lot more than the others. And if they kept J.J. Abrams as a writer from beginning to end and gave Rian Johnson his own spin-off, I think the sequels would have been a lot more appreciated than they are today. And before we get into the top 3, if you enjoy this content and want to see more like it, consider subscribing. And next up is Revenge of the Sith. I'm not a huge fan of the prequels, but the last movie in this trilogy is actually amazing. Just from the opening scene scene, Hayden Christensen and Ian McGregor has a lot more chemistry and banter than they did in the last film. This film has 4 lightsaber fights I would consider fantastic and is very heavy on the action while still having an engaging story. The way Anakin turns to the dark side was also very well done. You can argue that he turned to the dark side a little too quickly, which I kinda agree with, but the way Palpatine manipulates him and his fear of losing Padme, I thought made for an interesting motivation. It almost feels like the first 2 films of the prequel trilogy were just done to set up this movie, and this is the only film George Lucas really wanted to make. I don't know if that's true or not, but it definitely feels like that, and I do think that this film carries over some of the charm of the original trilogy into this one. This is also the only film in the prequels to be PG-13, as the first 2 films were rated PG, which I think shows that Star Wars works best when it's not specifically targeted for children and is allowed to go dark. It still has some over-the-top acting and some kind of outdated CGI, but honestly, I was so engaged in the story for this one that I didn't really care, so a great film that gets better every time I watch it. Next up is A New Hope. The first Star Wars movie is still one of the best and is all around just a classic, iconic film. This movie just goes from setting to setting, introducing new characters, and just like The Force Awakens and Revenge of the Sith, is a roller coaster that never stops. Just being introduced to this futuristic outer space that's so well defined and thought out makes this film feel different from any other movie from the time. I honestly didn't get into Star Wars until much later in life simply because I thought it looked stupid when I was young, but this movie instantly got me hooked. The scene where Luke is trying to blow up the Death Star while everyone else keeps getting shot down still gets my blood pumping. The score from John Williams is still iconic. Darth Vader is still a terrifying villain, and this film is still entertaining from beginning to end. And this will be a number 1 if it wasn't for this pick. And the best Star Wars movie of all time is The Empire Strikes Back. What do you expect? This movie takes everything from A New Hope and elevates it. Luke is made a more interesting character in this film as we see him train to become a Jedi and find out that his enemy is his father. The lightsaber fight between Vader and Luke is the best of the original trilogy, and the directing is also at its best. This movie embodies everything I love about Star Wars. The action, the characters, the journey, the planets, the score, the technology, the aliens, the sets, the imagination, the twists, the themes of good versus evil and hope, the mix of genres. It all comes together to make a perfect film in a timeless franchise. A franchise that would last for years in all forms of entertainment. Star Wars may not be ending anytime soon, but honestly, I don't want it to. It truly is timeless, has connected with so many generations over the years and will continue to connect with many more generations to come.